Okay, good afternoon. This is an open meeting of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission on November 18, 2015, under the Government of Sunshine Act. The Commission will consider today an important recommendation to enhance equity market structure by requiring alternative trading systems, ATSs, to provide significant new information to the public about their operations. In addition to improving the SEC's ability to oversee these trading venues, the collection and dissemination of this information would enable investors and other market participants to better assess trading on a particular ATS platform and compare it to trading on other platforms. In 1998, the Commission adopted Regulation ATS to establish a new regulatory framework for certain electronic trading venues operated by broker-dealers rather than regulate them as national securities exchanges. Since then, the equity markets have evolved substantially, driven by advancements in the technologies for generating, routing, and executing orders. These technologies have markedly improved the speed, capacity, and sophistication of trading, sparking a rise in trading volume that has come to be dispersed across multiple highly competitive trading venues. Equity trading now occurs every day across 11 registered equity exchanges, more than 40 ATSs, and a great many broker-dealers. ATSs that trade stocks listed on a national securities exchange, that is, NMS stocks, have become an integral part of the national market system. They are a significant source of liquidity for market participants, accounting for approximately 15% of total dollar volume in NMS stocks. While regulated differently, they compete with registered exchanges and in many cases operate with comparable sophistication. But despite the prominence of ATSs in today's U.S. equity market, Regulation ATS has remained largely as it was in 1998, with little information made available to the public about either ATS operations or the important relationship between the ATS and its broker-dealer operator. The information available oftentimes does not empower investors to perform deeper, more meaningful analyses or compare trading venues. Among other challenges, it can be almost impossible for an investor to assess adequately the conflicts of interest that can arise for a broker-dealer operating an ATS. In addition to running the ATS, the broker-dealer may conduct a wide range of brokerage, dealing, and other activities that raise potential conflicts, including customer services such as algorithmic trading software, agency sales, desk support, automated smart order routing services, and over-the-counter market making. It is now time to amend Regulation ATS to shine a brighter and clearer light on ATSs for the benefit of investors and the markets generally. Transparency is the primary means by which investors are empowered to protect their own interests. It is also a critical tool by which the Commission exercises its oversight of the market. The recommendation before us today is a significant step forward in delivering this transparency, modernizing Regulation ATS, and ultimately enhancing our equity market structure. Central to the recommendation is a new requirement that ATSs that transact in NMS stocks disclose extensive information to the public about their operations and the activities of their broker-dealer operators. Investors and other market participants would, in most cases, for the first time, have detailed information about the types of subscribers to an ATS, how the ATS handles orders and executions, the fees charged by the ATS, the market data used by the ATS, the conflicts of interest present in the operation of the ATS, and many other significant areas. All of this information would be provided on a new form, ATS-N, which would be filed with the Commission and made available to the public on the Commission's website. As the staff will detail shortly, the enhanced public transparency provided by Form ATS-N would be concentrated in two primary areas. First, ATSs transacting in NMS stocks would be required to publicly disclose information relating to the activities of its broker-dealer operator and the operator's affiliates. These disclosures would give market participants insight into potential conflicts of interest that can arise when business interests of the broker-dealer operator or its affiliates compete with the interests of market participants that access and trade on the ATS. Second, these ATSs would be required to provide market participants with important information about the manner in which they operate. This operational transparency would allow market participants to better evaluate an ATS and make more informed decisions about where to route their orders. Critically, these disclosures would be subject to direct, focused Commission oversight of their accuracy, completeness, and consistency with the federal securities laws. Pursuant to the recommendation, the Commission would review and, by order, declare an initial Form ATS-N effective or, after notice and opportunity for hearing, ineffective. Absent an effective Form ATS-N, the ATS would not be permitted to operate without registering as a national securities exchange. This is a significant change from the current notice filing that an ATS provides to the Commission. The Commission would also review and, if necessary, halt material changes to the operation of the ATS platform and could, after notice and opportunity for hearing, suspend, limit, or revoke an ATS's exemption from operating as an exchange if warranted. This disclosure and review program will complement another of our ongoing initiatives to update and expand the disclosures provided to investors under Regulation NMS. The staff is preparing a recommendation that would give an investor new disclosures tailored to how the investor's trades are routed and executed, including information about order and execution sizes, price improvement, midpoint executions, and the use of indications of interest. Such investor-specific disclosures would complement the platform-specific disclosures that are before us today. It is important to note that today's recommendation does not propose to extend these transparency enhancements from NMS stock ATSs to platforms that trade fixed income securities, including those that trade government securities. This incremental approach is a reflection of the significant differences between the equity markets and the fixed income markets, as well as the need to implement rules that appropriately account for them. For each segment of the fixed income markets, including government securities, we must consider fully these differences before deciding what additional regulations would be optimal. But as I've said previously, serious consideration must be given to additional transparency initiatives in the various fixed income markets. I'm therefore pleased that the recommendation solicits comment on a range of issues that should assist in the assessment of such initiatives, including whether parts of today's proposal are appropriate for fixed income platforms. In particular, I welcome comment on the treatment of platforms trading government securities as part of our ongoing review of the U.S. Treasury markets in partnership with the Treasury Department, Federal Reserve, and CFTC, which all share jurisdiction over those markets. One important aspect of today's proposal, however, would apply to all ATS platforms currently subject to Regulation ATS. Specifically, the recommendation would require all ATS platforms to have written safeguards and procedures to protect subscribers' confidential trading information. ATSs are required today to establish such safeguards and procedures, but they are not required to maintain them in writing. Although the requirement to protect subscribers' confidential trading information is a key component of the ATS regulatory framework, violations have been a component of several settled enforcement actions brought by the Commission against ATSs in recent years. Confidentiality of subscriber trading information is of paramount importance when trading on ATSs. Indeed, market participants may choose to send orders to an ATS for the very purpose of trading anonymously and mitigating the impact their trading may have on the market. It is essential that we further strengthen this requirement as proposed today. Before I ask Steve Luparella, the Director of the Division of Trading and Markets, to discuss the recommendation in detail, I would like to thank Steve, as well as Gary Gottschall, David Shulman, Tyler Ramo, Matthew Curcio, Marcia Dixon, Jennifer Dodd, David Garcia, Derek James, and Carl Emmigholz from the Division of Trading and Markets for their hard work on this rulemaking. I'd also like to thank Meredith Mitchell, Lori Price, Robert Tepley, Donna Chambers, and Janice Mitnick from the Office of the General Counsel, and Mark Flannery, Scott Bogus, Vanessa Countryman, Amy Edwards, Salil Pachara, I probably got that almost right, Claudia Moyse, and Hermine Wong from the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis. Finally, I would like to thank my fellow commissioners and all of our counsel for their hard work on these proposed amendments. Steve?
Thank you, Chair White. The Division of Trading and Markets recommends that the Commission propose amendments to Reg ATS and new Form ATS-N. The proposed amendments would require an ATS that facilitates transactions in NMS stocks to publicly disclose on Form ATSN detailed information about the operations of the ATS and the activities of its broker-dealer operator. Today, ATSs represent a significant source of liquidity in NMS stocks. They compete with and operate with almost the same complexity and sophistication as national securities exchanges. However, as you point out, regulatory requirements applicable to ATSs have remained largely unchanged since the adoption of ATS 17 years ago. And unlike national securities exchanges, ATSs are not required to publicly disclose their trading services, operations, or fees. We believe that public disclosures that would be required on proposed Form ATSN would allow market participants to better understand the operation of NMS ATSs and the activities of their broker-dealer operators. This in turn would allow them to make more informed decisions about which trading venue to route their orders to for execution. The division also believes that the proposal would also help customers of broker-dealers whose orders are routed to these ATSs for execution to evaluate those routing decisions. In addition, the proposed rules would provide a process for the Commission to determine whether an NMS stock ATS qualifies for the exemption from exchange registration under which it operates. The proposed amendments would provide the Commission the opportunity to review disclosures on Form ATSN for compliance with the requirements of Form ATSN, of Reg ATS, and other applicable federal securities laws. We believe these measures will facilitate the Commission's oversight of NMS stock ATSs and enhance investor protection. I would like to thank, in addition to the TNM staff with me today, all those in DERA and the Office of General Counsel who have worked closely with us on the rulemaking proposal. I would also like to thank the Commissioners and their counsel for their thoughtful comments throughout the process. I'll turn it over now to Tyler Ramo, who should especially be signaled out for his work. There's not a single word in the 580 pages that he hasn't sweated over, and he'll go into more detail, although not 580 pages worth of detail.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, Chair White, Commissioners. I'd like to highlight 4 key recommendations regarding the proposal to amend Exchange Act Rule 3A1-1 and Regulation ATS for ATSs that facilitate transactions in NMS stocks. NMS stock ATSs currently operate pursuant to an exemption from the statutory definition of exchange under Rule 3A1-1, provided that the ATS complies with Regulation ATS. Regulation ATS requires, among other things, that ATSs register as broker-dealers and file notices about their operations with the Commission on Form ATS, which is not made publicly available. The Division recommends adopting new Rule 304 under Reg ATS, which would set forth, among others, the following provisions applicable to NMS stock ATSs. First, the Division recommends that the Commission propose to require NMS stock ATSs to provide detailed disclosures on a new disclosure form, proposed Form ATS-N. These disclosures are designed to provide market participants with information about activities of the broker-dealer that operates the NMS stock ATS and its affiliates, as such activities relate to the ATS, the manner in which, and second, the manner in which the NMS stock ATS operates. With respect to the activities of the broker-dealer operator of the ATS and its affiliates, Form ATS-N would require disclosures related to their first, operation of non-ATS trading centers and other NMS stock ATSs, products and services offered to subscribers of the ATS, arrangements with unaffiliated trading centers, trading activities on the ATS, use of smart order routers or algorithms to send and receive subscriber orders to and from the ATS, employees that service the operations of the ATS and other business units or affiliates of the broker-dealer operator, service providers to the ATS, use of services, functionalities, or procedures of the NMS stock ATS that differ from that of subscribers to the ATS, and safeguards and procedures established to protect the confidential trading information of subscribers. With respect to the manner in which the NMS stock ATS operates, Form ATS-N would require disclosures including a number of things, including types of subscribers, hours of operation, and order types, connectivity, order entry, co-location procedures, segmentation of order flow and the provision of notice regarding segmentation, display of orders and other trading interests, including indications of interest and conditional orders, trading services, including matching methodologies, priority and execution procedures, and price improvement mechanisms, procedures governing trading during a suspension, system disruption, or malfunction, opening, reopening, and closing processes, and after-hour procedures, outbound routing from the ATS, use of market data, fees, procedures regarding trade reporting, clearance, and settlement, and market quality statistics provided by the NMS Stock ATS to one or more subscribers. And finally, as applicable, information about the NMS Stock ATS's obligations related to order display, execution access pursuant to Rule 301B3 of Reg ATS, and fair access pursuant to Rule 301B5 of Regulation ATS. Second, the Division recommends that the Commission propose that Form ATS-N filings be made public and posted on the Commission's website. In addition, each NMS Stock ATS would be required to post on its own website a direct URL hyperlink to the Commission's website where the public Form ATS-N filings would be located. Third, the Division recommends that the Commission propose Rule 304 to include provisions designed to help facilitate the Commission's oversight of NMS Stock ATSs. Rule 304 would provide that no exemption from the definition of exchange would be available to an NMS Stock ATS unless the Commission declares its Form ATS-N effective. Proposed Rule 304 would provide a process for the Commission to determine whether an entity qualifies for the exemption provided under Rule 3A1-1 and to declare a Form ATS-N either effective or, after notice and opportunity for hearing, ineffective. Under the proposal, NMS Stock ATSs will continue to be required to comply with Rules 300 to 303 of Reg ATS, except Rule 301B2, which governs the filing of existing Form ATS notices. The Division also recommends that NMS Stock ATSs, which are operating pursuant to a Form ATS as of the effective date of proposed Rule 304, file Form ATS-N with the Commission within 120 calendar days of the effective date. These ATSs could continue to operate pursuant to a previously filed Form ATS, pending the Commission's review of the ATS's new filing on the Form ATS-N. The Commission would have 120 calendar days to review and declare the Form ATS-N effective or ineffective, and could extend the time frame for an additional 120 calendar days under certain circumstances. For NMS Stock ATSs that are not operating as of the effective date of Rule 304, the Commission would have 120 calendar days to review and declare a Form ATS-N effective or ineffective. The 120-day review period could be extended for an additional 90 days under certain circumstances. Proposed Rule 304 would also require the NMS Stock ATS to file amendments to disclosures on Form ATS-N, which would include a 30 calendar day advance notice requirement for material changes to the operations of the ATS. Proposed 304 would also provide a process for the Commission to declare an amendment ineffective by order if it finds that such action is necessary or appropriate in the public interest and is consistent with the protection of investors. Finally, the Division is also recommending that the Commission propose certain amendments to Rule 301B10 of Regulation ATS that would apply to all ATSs, not just NMS Stock ATSs, with respect to their safeguards and procedures to protect subscribers' confidential trading information. Rule 301B10 of Regulation ATS currently requires ATSs to establish adequate safeguards and procedures to protect subscribers' confidential trading information. The Division recommends that the Commission propose amendments to Regulation ATS, that would require all ATSs to reduce to writing such safeguards and procedures, as well as their oversight procedures to ensure that those safeguards and procedures are followed. Thank you very much. I'll now turn it over to Mark Flannery in the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis for a discussion of the economic effects of the proposed amendments.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair White and Commissioners. Today, the Commission is considering whether to amend Regulation ATS, which would increase the operational transparency and oversight of alternative trading systems that trade NMS stocks. We have carefully considered the potential economic effects of these proposed amendments to Regulation ATS, including their effects on efficiency, competition, and capital formation. Since the inception of Regulation ATS in 1998, the equity market has evolved significantly, resulting in an increase in the number of securities exchanges and ATSs trading NMS stocks. Today, NMS stock ATSs operate similarly to exchanges and compete side by side with them for order flow. However, relative to the exchanges, there is limited and differential information made publicly available to market participants about how orders interact, match, and execute on an NMS stock ATS. This current environment could impede market participants' ability to evaluate whether submitting order flow to a particular trading venue aligns with their investing or trading objectives. A key aspect of this proposal is requiring NMS stock ATSs to file proposed Form ATSN. This form will provide more detailed public disclosure about the operations of NMS stock ATSs and the activities of their broker-dealer operators and affiliates. We believe that these disclosures could help market participants make better informed decisions about where to route their orders in order to achieve their investing or trading objectives. The additional information may allow market participants to better predict how orders will be executed, and they may therefore make better routing decisions. This will, in turn, enhance their execution quality. Furthermore, by enhancing the transparency of NMS stock ATS operations, these proposed amendments should foster greater competition between NMS stock ATSs and securities exchanges. Increased competition for order flow among and between these trading venues could lower trading costs and increase market liquidity and capital formation. However, enhanced operational transparency of NMS stock ATSs does not come without costs. NMS ATSs may face greater costs of providing detailed disclosure about their operations and activities. As a result, certain venues may choose to exit the market. Greater disclosure requirements may also raise the barriers to entry for new NMS stock ATSs. Potential exit of existing NMS stock ATSs and greater barriers to entry for new entrants could impact market participants by reducing their choices of trading venues. However, if the NMS stock ATSs that exit are the ones that face the greatest cost of providing disclosure and the ones that have the lowest execution quality, then the continuing NMS stock ATSs may offer better execution quality to market participants. In closing, I would like to thank my colleagues in the Division of Trading and Markets and the Office of General Counsel, with whom we have worked closely during the development of this proposal. Thank you. We're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you all. I have no questions at this point. Before we actually proceed to the commissioners' comments, I just want to take a moment to recognize our colleague and friend, Commissioner Luis Aguilar, for his tremendous service to the Commission. While this is likely not Commissioner Aguilar's last open meeting, as you all know, he announced on Monday that he would be leaving the Commission no later than the end of December. Commissioner Aguilar has been a true champion of protecting investors and our markets from his days as a staff attorney more than 30 years ago to his service as the senior-most commissioner. Luis has always shown great passion for his work at the Commission. Luis, we will miss your depth of knowledge and your passion for the agency and its mission. Thank you for outstanding public service. You'll be greatly missed, but we'll leave behind a legacy of many accomplishments. Commissioner Aguilar.
Thank you, Chair White, and thank you for the kind words. I'm still here for a bit longer, so let's hope you mean those words when I actually do leave, and I hope you will. Let me apologize in advance if my voice breaks. I'm not feeling very well, and my voice is kind of weak. Today, the Commission considers proposing much-needed enhancements to the regulatory regime for alternative trading systems, or ATSs, that trade national market system stocks. I will support these proposals because it could go a long way toward helping market participants make informed decisions as they attempt to navigate the Byzantine structure of today's equity markets. ATSs reportedly first appeared in the late 1960s, but they truly began to flourish after the Commission's 2005 adoption of Regulation NMS. Today, there are more than 40 active ATSs registered with the Commission, and those that trade NMS stocks have, by some estimates, accounted for nearly 18% of all trading in those stocks at various times over the past 2 years. That figure represents a more than fourfold increase since 2005, when ATSs accounted for roughly 4% of NMS stock trading. In fact, some ATSs now execute a larger portion of consolidated volume than smaller exchanges do. The ascendance of ATSs in recent years is a result of a confluence of factors, including a prolonged period of subdued market volatility and the ability of ATSs to offer certain advantages, such as attractive fee structures, price improvements, and faster processing speeds, among others. Yet, perhaps the greatest catalyst for the rise of ATSs in recent years has been institutional investors' growing need to trade large blocks of stock without causing markets to move against them. This need is not new, but it has become increasingly acute with the advent of algorithmic trading strategies and the diminished order sizes that have resulted. ATSs responded to this need by offering even more trading on an anonymous basis and without displaying specific order information before trades occur. These types of ATSs have come to be known as dark pools. Dark pools initially portrayed themselves as havens from predatory traders. They achieved this in part by excluding high-frequency traders who supposedly use brute speed to front-run institutional investors' large orders. Lured by this promise of safety, institutional traders embrace ATSs as a solution to their trading needs. Unfortunately, all too often, the safety these investors sought proved illusory. Attracting sufficient liquidity to achieve critical mass has proven a continuous challenge for many dark pools. They have addressed this existential problem in various ways. For example, many dark pool operators have allowed their own proprietary trading desks to have access to their pools, while other operators have allowed their affiliates to trade within their pools. And still other operators have given high-speed traders access to their dark pools, all in an attempt to ensure that ATS subscribers will find counterparties for their trades as quickly and consistently as possible. Setting aside the propriety of these approaches, their adoption suggests that the implacable need the dark pools have for liquidity has intensified certain conflicts of interest between them and their subscribers. The inability to properly manage these conflicts of interest has led the Commission to bring a number of enforcement actions against dark pool operators in recent years. For example, in 2011, the Commission brought an enforcement action against one dark pool operator for falsely advertising that no proprietary trading took place in its dark pool. In reality, one of the operator's affiliates not only engaged in proprietary trading in the pool, but it also secretly enjoyed unfair informational advantages, which it used to front-run subscribers' trades. The lesson from this case, however, apparently fell on deaf ears. For just a few months ago, the Commission settled another enforcement action against one of the oldest dark pool operators because it, too, had failed to disclose that it was engaged in proprietary trading within its pool. That dark pool operator also gave its proprietary trading desk an unfair informational edge over other subscribers, despite guidance from the operator's compliance department that this was improper. Of course, conflict of interest come in many guises. For example, the Commission has brought enforcement actions against dark pools for failing to protect their subscribers' confidential information. And, just last year, the Commission brought an enforcement action against one operator of a large dark pool because, among other things, it secretly offered high-speed traders special order types that gave them an unfair advantage over other subscribers. Interestingly, this savvy dark pool operator knew how to play both sides of the fence. In addition to giving high-frequency traders an unfair edge, this operator secretly allowed certain of his favorite subscribers to avoid trading with those very same high-frequency traders. This dismal litany of misconduct by dark pool operators appears to have led at least some market participants to lose faith in the ability of dark pools that are operated by broker-dealers to provide a level playing field. Bereft of regulatory intervention, these market participants seem to be taking matters into their own hands. To that end, 9 of the largest asset managers have banded together to form their own dark pool, one that is operated by and open exclusively to institutional investors. According to reports, one of the goals of this new buy-side institutional-only dark pool is to, and I quote, eliminate the types of profit-driven conflicts of interest that have been seen in some existing venues, close quote. This action by buy-side investors, with approximately $14 trillion in assets under management, as trillion with a T, seems to be a clear warning that the markets are not working as well as they could, a warning that has gone unheeded for far too long. A common thread running through the enforcement actions against dark pools is that market participants lack crucial information about how these ATSs function and about the serious conflicts of interest they can harbor. Today, the Commission takes steps towards shedding much needed light onto dark pools by requiring certain ATSs to be more transparent and by requiring them to undergo Commission review to ensure that they qualify for the exemption from registering as an exchange. The rules and amendments proposed today will require ATSs that trade most types of equities to furnish both investors and the Commission with much more detailed information about their operations. Importantly, many of the disclosures that today's proposals would require should reveal the very types of conflicts of interest that lay at the heart of the enforcement actions brought against dark pools by the Commission and other regulators. For example, the proposal would require operators of covered ATSs to disclose whether they or any of their affiliates are submitting trades to the ATS, either on a proprietary basis or otherwise. Covered ATSs would also be required to publicly disclose whether they or a subset of their subscribers enjoy any advantages over other subscribers, such as special order types and preferential access to trade information. The proposal would also require covered ATSs to disclose their policies and procedures for ensuring the confidentiality of subscribers' information. And these ATSs would have to identify the positions of employees and third parties that have access to this information. The additional disclosures that we required under today's proposal will go a long way toward enabling investors and broker-dealers to make more informed decisions about which ATSs they may wish to route their orders to. But the Commission should not stop there. Instead, the Commission should give careful consideration to whether additional measures are warranted. For example, are the conflicts of interest confronting many ATSs so intractable that ATSs should simply be prohibited from engaging in any activity other than operating the ATS? In addition, the Commission should dust off its 2009 proposal regarding non-public trading and determine whether the threshold for ATSs to display their orders should be lowered to account for their much larger role in today's equity markets. Additionally, I hope that the Commission will examine whether Regulation ATS should be expanded to include platforms that trade government securities exclusively, and what information those entities should publicly disclose about their operations. The release includes questions on these and other important issues, and I urge commenters to weigh in with their views so that the Commission will be able to pursue new rules with the benefit of the knowledge, views, and experiences of a variety of market participants. Now, looking more broadly at our evolving market structure, it seems clear that ATSs will continue to play an important role in the coming years. Yet, the precise contours of that role and the implications it may hold for investors are not immediately evident. In particular, I think the Commission should explore certain issues as it seeks to better oversee our markets. First, given that the average trade sizes on dark pools that trade equities have fallen to the same levels as those seen on lit exchanges, what is the future of block trading? Does that future differ for large cap and smaller cap stocks? And does block trading need to be reconceptualized to account for the algorithm-driven trading that dominates today's markets? For example, should market participants redefine block trades as a percentage of average daily trading volume rather than a fixed number of shares? Second, can ATSs attract sufficient liquidity to remain viable without engaging in the types of misconduct that have given rise to the enforcement actions I mentioned earlier? Can ATSs survive without the participation of high-frequency and other algorithmic traders? If not, can ATSs facilitate meaningful block trading? Third, does the current regulatory structure favor the expansion of dark pools? If so, what does this portend for the complexity and fragmentation of our equity markets? Should the Commission consider limiting the growth of equity ATSs, especially if that growth begins to threaten the quality of price discovery, as some studies suggest it might? Alternatively, should the Commission consider curbing the volume of orders that are executed in dark pools, as the second Market and Financial Instrument Directive will do for smaller orders in Europe? In any event, I think that the Commission should closely monitor this European experiment and see what lessons can be drawn. Fourth, are ATSs the best model to facilitate block trading? If not, what other approaches might fare better? Why have recent efforts to establish trading venues for block trades failed to return block trading to pre-financial crisis levels, despite clear interest from market participants to engage in such trades? And finally, can ATSs for fixed income securities potentially fill the vacuum created by the retrenchment of traditional broker-dealer activity in those markets? Clearly, the relentlessly changing nature of our capital markets requires the Commission to be a proactive participant, knowledgeable and informed as to market innovations and trends. The public is not well served when the SEC lacks information or is merely a passive observer. Today's proposed rules will enable the Commission, our staff, and the public to have better visibility into what has been a murky segment of the market. Ultimately, an informed regulator is a more effective regulator, and an effective regulator is vital for investor confidence and market integrity. In conclusion, I will vote to approve these proposed rules and amendments because they mark a significant step forward in the Commission's efforts to enhance the oversight of ATSs that play a vital role in today's equity markets. I remain mindful, however, that there is still much work to do to ensure that investors have access to the types of disclosures that they need in order to make informed decisions. Lastly, I would like to call attention to the efforts of the Division of Trading and Markets, the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis, and the Office of General Counsel for their hard work and diligence. The American public and I thank you. I don't have any questions for the staff this afternoon. They've been very kind throughout this entire process, and I thank them for that. And thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Stein?
I want to join my colleagues in thanking the staff for all the hard work that went into this release, in particular Tyler Raimo, Matthew Curcio, Marcia Dixon, Jennifer Dodd, David Garcia, Derek James, Carl Emigholtz from the Division of Trading and Markets, as well as Amy Edwards, Salil Pacharia, and Claudia Moyes from the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis. And thank you to everyone else on the extensive team for your dedication and hard work. Today, the Commission meets to consider a proposal to increase the transparency of alternative trading systems. Many ATSs are commonly referred to as dark pools. To most people, dark pools are a little bit of a mystery, and that is because they often function in great secrecy. Today's proposal seeks to shine some light into that darkness. Modern ATSs are a product of the rapid technological advances that have revolutionized the way stocks are bought and sold. An ATS is an electronic order matching system operated by a broker-dealer. Much like an exchange, it brings together buyers and sellers. There are many types of ATSs, and they facilitate and purchase the sale of all types of securities, ranging from equities to corporate bonds to treasuries and more. Unlike an exchange, which must disclose publicly quotes and prices at which securities transactions occur, an ATS can operate in the dark with only limited information publicly available about its operations. Beginning in the 1990s, broker-dealers started using this emerging technology to reimagine the capital markets. One of the first ATSs was launched in 1996 and competed directly with exchanges through an entirely electronic platform. And this platform eliminated both the specialist and the market makers. These trading venues were also became known as a place for larger sized or block trades. Relatively quickly, alternative trading systems started handling a significant amount of securities order volume. Dark pools were in many ways replacing the traditional upstairs market, while also providing services conventionally provided only by the registered exchanges. And they had a growing footprint in the markets. Since 1998, ATSs have been governed by Commission Rule Regulation ATS. The 17-year-old Commission rule started to integrate these emerging electronic trading systems into the regulatory framework. Reg ATS provided an exemption for these alternative venues from ordinary exchange regulation in order to encourage the development of these new and innovative market centers. In addition, unlike exchanges, ATSs were not required to provide public transparency about either their operations or their activities. These late 1990s regulatory changes did encourage the proliferation of these alternative trading venues. By 2009, the number of active dark pools had grown to 32 and accounted for 8% of all the shares traded. Over the past 6 years, both the number of active dark pools and the percentage of shares traded in dark pools has increased. It is currently estimated that over 200 billion shares of NMS stocks are traded on nearly 40 of these private trading venues, representing over $10 trillion in securities transactions each year. This accounts for over 15% of the total shares traded in the United States markets. What was once a niche venue for certain sophisticated parties negotiating large-sized trades is now a significant part of the capital markets. Moreover, the line between ATSs and exchanges has become much blurrier. These alternative trading systems have grown up and they have become a major part of the marketplace. The current average trade size of about 200 shares is not significantly different from the average trade size that occurs on exchanges. And the volume of business done in dark pools has grown so significantly that one must at least consider what, if any, effect it is having on price discovery in the larger marketplace, or perhaps how it could be contributing to a masking of true supply and demand. As Commissioner Aguilar mentioned, recent enforcement actions by the Commission and others have also highlighted issues regarding how some ATSs have been functioning. Today's proposal seeks to begin to address some of the issues that have emerged during the past 17 years. It relies heavily on the tool of disclosure, proposing to increase the operational transparency of dark pools and their operators. And it's an important first step, and one that I support. Greater transparency, the hallmark of the United States capital markets, should benefit both issuers and investors. Under today's proposal, ATSs would, for the first time, be required to publicly reveal important information about what they do and how they work. The new form in the proposal, Form ATS-N, requires ATSs to answer some basic questions that should inform investors about the range of operations of the ATS. This includes information about its fees, its trading services, its use of market data, and its fair access standards. It also requires ATS operators to describe their smart order router and the algorithms they use to send or receive orders. In addition, ATSs would be required to disclose any potential conflicts of interest. For example, a broker-dealer operator would need to disclose a potential conflict that might arise from its own dealing activities within the dark pool. Most important, the proposed rule would require an ATS to publicly report important metrics or performance statistics if they are provided to one or more subscribers. Sometimes such information, like the characteristics of the ATS's order flow or execution, is provided only to certain subscribers so that they can evaluate whether a venue may meet their investment objectives. While the Commission is not prescribing a one-size-fits-all approach in this proposal, we are asking about ways to improve the standardization and comparability of such data and reporting across ATSs. So I hope that market participants and others will help us think through the best practices for disclosure in this area. And while disclosure is absolutely a positive step forward, the question I'm left pondering today is whether we have done enough. For example, does the relationship between a broker-dealer operator and its ATS make it more difficult for disclosure to adequately address certain inherent conflicts of interest with its subscribers? Are there certain conflicts of interest that should be addressed in other ways? For example, should certain conflicts of interest just be prohibited going forward? Finally, as Commissioner Eckler mentioned, there are important venues that are left out of this ATS transparency proposal. Has the Commission missed the mark by creating a new class of NMS stock ATSs, which will have greater transparency than other alternative trading systems? Over 40 years ago, Congress directed the Commission to remove impediments to and perfect the mechanism of a national market system. My predecessor, Commissioner Philip Loomis, described these improvements as a maximum opportunity for orders to interact and be matched, and to enable market professionals to have access to the entire order flow. And this, in turn, greatly improves their ability to perform their functions effectively and efficiently. Have we achieved this objective? Or more importantly, the objective of making sure ATSs contribute to fair and orderly markets that promote capital formation while protecting investors. I look forward to commenters' views about whether this proposal is the right approach and how the Commission can better address the fairness and efficiency of ATSs and their role in the larger capital markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pivovar.
Thank you, Chair White. I am very happy to support today's rulemaking, which would meaningfully enhance the transparency of alternative trading system operations. But before I discuss the content of today's proposal, I want to make a few comments about the deliberative process that preceded today's meeting. It's no secret that I've been critical of the processes that led to some of the Commission's recent rulemakings, so I'm delighted that the process used to develop today's rulemaking reflected a much different approach. In recent days, Commissioner Aguilar, Commissioner Stein, and I jointly offered refinements to the proposed rule. The proposal that the Commission is publishing today reflects those changes and is all the better for it. By now, you have heard the details of the proposal from the staff and my colleagues, so I'll simply underscore that this rulemaking holds the promise of making ATS operations more transparent to both the Commission and the public, and thus may enable the Commission to provide better oversight of these important intermediaries and empower market participants to make informed choices about where to direct their orders. However, for the sake of clarity, I also want to emphasize what this rulemaking is not intended to do. The Commission is not introducing a regime of merit review of ATS operations. This proposal is about disclosure and disclosure alone. Now, there are over 500 questions in the proposing release, all of which deserve time and attention. But I want to highlight several broad issues for market participants and other interested parties to consider as they evaluate whether and how to comment. The Commission has historically and quite deliberately applied different rules to ATSs and exchanges. Today's rulemaking again prompts comparisons between the regulatory obligations of different types of trading venues. Please provide us with comment on whether the proposal strikes the right balance. Would the requirements being proposed come too close to or effectively erase the line between exchanges and ATSs? What impacts will the proposal have on ATSs relative to exchanges and vice versa? In addition, we have made reasonable decisions about when and what information ATSs would be required to make to the public. In other words, would market participants have access to relevant information and useful information at the time it would actually be relevant and useful? I also hope commenters will tell us whether the extent or type of disclosures that would be required on Form ATSN might introduce barriers to innovation or to competition. Would making operational details public cause ATSs to change their product offerings? Would extending disclosures beyond the broker-dealer operator of ATS to include affiliates of a broker-dealer operator result in adjustment to business structures? The proposal contemplates that the Commission will deem Form ATSN either effective or ineffective. Is this the appropriate construct? Will the fact that the Commission has to opine on the effectiveness of the form incentivize ATSs to engage in a dialogue with the Commission staff in advance of a formal filing such that the timelines for Commission action laid out in the rule would be moot? Is it clear what the Commission's review of the forms will entail? Now, in the spirit of the upcoming holiday, let me pose my final question in this way. Is the proposal appropriately balanced, or is it overstuffed with requirements that would simply add extra calories without being particularly satisfying? That one was for you, Steve. Now it is time for the Thanksgiving. The staff put in a tremendous amount of work on this rulemaking, and their efforts are much appreciated. Thank you. I also want to dish out another hearty helping of thanks to Commissioners Aguilar and Stein and their councils for their substantive contributions to and their collegiality during the development of this proposal. I have no questions, and I hope all of you have a safe and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Let me also reiterate my praise for the staff on this proposal and your patience and persistence in working with all of our council on this. Unless there are other comments or questions from the commissioners, we'll take a vote on the proposed rules. Do the commissioners vote to approve the recommendation from the Division of Trading and Markets? Please signify your vote by saying yes or no.
Yes.
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 Yes. The proposal is adopted unanimously. Thank you very much. Happy Thanksgiving, and we're adjourned.